Turn with me just for a second or two to the book of 1 Samuel and chapter 1. And I take you here because this is where I've been in the last few weeks, reflecting on the opening chapters of Samuel. And I want to explore just for a second the parameters of holiness in which Hannah herself was motivated to be holy by a consideration of the holiness of God. You're introduced to this little family, Elkanah and Hannah, whom Elkanah loved. But there's another woman. There's Peninnah. Elkanah has two wives, and alarm bells are going off in your mind. There are problems here. There are significant problems here. And as you read the chapter, you remember that Hannah has no children and seemingly can't have children. But Peninnah is having children as often as fruit drops off the trees in the fall. And she knows it. And on visits to the temple in Bethel, Peninnah, snooty little thing that she appears to be, rubs it in. You can imagine a conversation in the house of Peninnah with her children, and her children are saying, "Why does Auntie Hannah not have children?" And Peninnah says, "Well, I don't know, but why don't you go and ask her?" But I think God has cursed her. And you remember when she gets to the temple, on the journey there, she's off her food, she's crying, she's weeping. She's a woman in spiritual torment and trial. And Hannah hears her husband, Elkanah, who has read How to Be a Good Husband, saying to her, "Why are you crying? Why are you off your food? Am I not worth more to you than 10 sons?" What an oaf. And you remember when Hannah gets to the temple and Eli the priest, she's praying, you remember? And words are coming out, but there's no sound. She's vocalizing, but her mouth is moving, but there's no sound. And Eli, who's been reading the same journal about male sensitivity as Elkanah, says, "You're drunk, woman." Hannah does one of the most incredible things in 1 Samuel chapter 1. It has moved me beyond description in the last couple of weeks as I've thought about it. She prays a prayer. Do you know what her prayer was? "Lord, give to me, and I will give him back to you." That was her prayer. In the midst of her trial, in the midst of her pain, in the midst of her difficulty. And remember, in 1 Peter, Peter is writing to a church that's facing trial. He's writing probably in the mid to late 60s, with the onset of Roman persecution coming upon the church, and he's preparing them for the day of trial. And what he wants them to see is that in the day of trial, they must learn to be holy because God is holy. Now, if you turn to 1 Samuel, look at chapter 2 and verse 2. Now, notice in chapter 2, Hannah sings that glorious song. It's the song that Mary almost cites verbatim in the Magnificat, you remember. And look at what she says in verse 2. There is none holy like the Lord. There is none besides you. What was it that enabled Hannah to reflect that sheer consecrated spirit, to pray that selfless prayer, Lord, give to me, and I will give him back to you? And when Samuel is, 3 or 4, when he's been weaned, she takes him to Shiloh and she leaves him there. Can you even imagine what that would be like? Can you imagine the selflessness of it? Denying herself, denying her self-interest. It was the holiness of God. It was the holiness of God that shaped and molded the pattern of her holy living. Don't you think that that's what Peter is talking about here? When he's preparing these Christians to face the onset of trial and difficulty. Maybe you're saying this morning, you see, and in an audience of this size, there must be many of you here today facing unimaginable trials and unimaginable difficulties. And maybe the question that you're asking is, how in the world can I be holy when I've got this trial? Lord, take this trial away in order that I might be holy. And God is saying to you this morning, this is the reason why the trial is here. It is to make you holy. It is to bring you to an end of yourself. It is for you to capture that there is nothing in this world that can attract you, and that you must be attracted to the beauty. And yes, Psalm 29 speaks about the beauty of holiness. There's an intimidation to holiness. There's a purity to holiness. There's a separation to holiness. But there's a beauty of holiness too. In Isaiah 6, there's an attraction, and there's a fascination, and there's a repulsion too. And don't you think that Peter is saying here, in the context of the oncoming trial, in the midst of your pain, in the midst of your difficulty, in the midst of the horrendousness of it, only God can fully satisfy. Because it was by him you were made, and it was by him that you were remade in Jesus Christ. Be holy because God is holy.